Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are taking a really targeted look at psychoanalysis. I mean, right into one of its most challenging areas, treating the schizophrenic patient. And we're moving beyond, general theory. We're focusing intensely on this 1983 framework from Hyman Spotnitz. Specifically, the critical role of countertransference.
Exactly. And our mission today, it's very specific. It's about understanding how a modern analyst, well, how they must not just manage, but actively develop and then resolve these really intense emotional responses, the countertransference, all to guide the schizophrenic patient towards genuine emotional maturation. This isn't just passive reflection. It's really an active emotional kind of intervention.
And the centerpiece, really, of this whole deep dive is Spotnitz's focus on what he called the missing feelings, those core foundational emotional responses, usually things like love and safety, that the patient needed way back in early development, but just never got.
Never received them, no.
So the goal, ultimately, is helping this patient build up the capacity to feel, a whole full spectrum of emotion.
That's the aim.
Okay, so let's unpack the initial hurdles then. Spotnitz defined 3 distinct types of countertransference resistance. CT resistance. These are the obstacles, right?
Yeah.
That stop the analyst doing the necessary work. So what are the 3 sources of this resistance?
Okay. The first one is probably the most familiar, I'd say. It's the subjective type.
Right.
This resistance, it comes purely from inside the analyst's own personal history. Their own hang-ups, past traumas, maybe conflicts that just color how they see the patient.
So like if the patient reminds the analyst of their annoying cousin or something.
Exactly like that. That's subjective CT. Pretty straightforward, relatively speaking.
Okay. That seems like the standard risk, doesn't it? Something every therapist is trained to watch out for, projecting your own past.
It is, absolutely. But the next 2 types, they're actually induced by the patient. And that's where things get really complex.
Okay.
So the second type is the objective type of resistance. This is resistance that's stirred up by feelings the patient had with their own parents.
Okay.
And now they're reenacting that dynamic with the analyst. So it's a reaction to a known, sort of established parental thing.
Got it. Induced by the patient, but based on their past experiences.
Yeah.
And the third type, this is the one that connects right back to those missing feelings you mentioned.
Precisely. This is the Anaclitic type, and this is, well, it's absolutely profound. It consists of the very specific emotional needs or responses the patient needed for mature development, but just didn't receive. The resistance here, for the analyst, is their own inability, maybe, or just emotional fatigue in actually generating and transmitting that missing positive emotional connection, that missing love, that missing validation, especially when the patient is often being intensely frustrating or difficult.
Wow. So okay, let me see if I've got this. The subjective and objective types are defenses against feelings that are sort of known, either in the analyst or the patient's history.
Right.
But the Anaclitic type, that's resistance against having to basically conjure up a feeling that has no real historical blueprint of the patient's life.
You've got it. That's exactly the challenge.
And that just sets up this enormous goal for treatment, doesn't it? Moving the patient beyond these primitive, destructive forces. Spotnitz called them murderous forces, and helping them finally develop constructive, procreative, life-giving impulses instead.
Yes. And just to clarify that language a bit, the murderous forces aren't necessarily literal. They represent that raw, pre-verbal destructive aggression that's never been properly integrated.
Right.
It often comes out as, explosive behavior or sometimes complete emotional shutdown. And the procreative impulses, well, they represent the mature, integrated energy needed to actually build a life, form relationships, feel positive things.
And you can't get to the constructive without dealing with the aggression first.
You really can't. You have to process the aggression first.
Okay. So that leads us straight to the 2 essential kinds of emotional interchange needed for that maturation. How does the analyst structure the time? How do they manage that? Getting the patient through the murderous forces and towards the procreative ones.
It basically requires 2 stages or types of emotional work. The first is what Spotnitz called the healthful, genuine, aggressive emotional interchange. Let's just call it the aggressive interchange for short.
Okay, HGAEI. Aggressive interchange.
Right. And this is absolutely necessary for the patient's personality maturation. But here's the key thing. Spotnitz is emphatic that during this phase, the analyst cannot rely on emotional empathy alone.
Wait, what? Cannot rely on empathy.
It sounds counterintuitive, I know. Relying on empathy too soon, offering comfort immediately, would actually interrupt the necessary aggressive release.
So, The analyst has to temporarily suspend that natural human impulse to comfort or empathize. How on earth does that work in practice? That sounds hard.
It is incredibly hard. It's a paradox, really. To truly heal, the patient must be allowed, even encouraged, to express that raw, destructive aggression, the full force of their unmet needs, their historical rage, directly at the analyst.
Wow.
If the analyst immediately steps in to soften the blow with comfort or reassurance, the patient never fully processes that aggression. So yes, this phase requires the temporary suspension of the constructive emotional work.
Okay, but if the constructive interchange is the love, the acceptance is the very thing the patient missed most fundamentally, how can you possibly risk withholding it, even temporarily?
Well, you don't withhold it permanently, that's crucial. You sequence it. The key to navigating this aggressive interchange without shattering the therapeutic relationship lies entirely in the analyst's internal work.
Ah, back to the countertransference.
Exactly. It requires the successful resolution of their own negative narcissistic countertransference resistance.
Okay, break that down. What does that mean in feeling terms?
It means the analyst has to develop the capacity to absorb the patient's negativity, their rage, their criticism, that induced feeling of wanting to run away, of feeling attacked or useless, without retaliating, without collapsing emotionally, and without shutting down.
They have to just take it.
They have to take it, stay functional, and stay emotionally present while being the target of all that aggression. It's an immense emotional feat.
I can only imagine. That sounds like an incredible emotional toll. Okay, so if they manage that, then they can move on to the second type of work. The healthful, genuine, constructive emotional interchange, the HGCEI, the constructive part.
Precisely. That's the sequence. This constructive phase is then needed to finally fill that deep emotional void. But again, it's exceptionally difficult because, as we've said, the positive feeling is often just fundamentally absent or blocked in the emotionally deprived schizophrenic patient.
They don't know how to receive it, maybe, or even recognize it.
Often, yes. They lack the framework, they don't know how to receive it, or they distrust it intensely when it's offered.
So if the positive feeling isn't something the patient can easily initiate, or even, like you said, recognize, where does that needed constructive energy actually come from? How is it generated in the room?
That's the crux of it. It has to be the product of mutual work. Mutual helpfulness, mutual cooperation, and critically, fearless, honest, emotional communication.
Fearless, honest. This is where the talking cure is taken to its absolute limit. It implies that both the patient saying everything that comes to mind and the therapist saying everything relevant within the therapeutic frame. That whole process becomes emotionally constructive and healing.
Hold on, let me just push back on that for a second. If the patient is inducing these really powerful negative feelings, in the analyst you said disturbing, frightened feelings, the urge to leave,
Yes.
how does the analyst maintain professional boundaries while still engaging in this? Well, radical form of honest emotional communication. Isn't there a huge risk of burnout or even ethical lines getting blurred if the analyst is relying so heavily on their own personal emotional capacity to generate the needed response? That is the essential risk. Absolutely. And it's precisely why the sources, including Spotnitz, stress that personal analytic therapy and ongoing careful supervision are just non-negotiable for any therapist doing this kind of work.
Right, the support system has to be there.
It's vital because the analyst must successfully develop and resolve both the positive narcissistic transference feelings from the patient and the positive narcissistic countertransference feelings within themselves.
So it's not acting.
No, absolutely not acting. They are internalizing the patient's deep emotional need, processing it through their own mature personality structure, and then genuinely generating a healthy, authentic response where there was essentially a void before in the patient's experience.
Okay.
That's what ultimately develops the analyst's capacity to deliver the needed positive anaclitic effect, that missing love and validation.
Okay, it's incredibly complex. To try and bring this very abstract and demanding framework down to earth a bit, let's look at the case illustration provided in the source material, the case of Mr. A.
Yes, Mr. A.
Tell us about his history. Why was he such a challenging case?
Well, Mr. A was almost the epitome of this kind of explosive, demanding patient profile. He'd had years of failed analyses before this one. Previous therapists had actually documented their fear of his rage. His hostile episodes were apparently so severe that they contributed to his first wife having a psychotic breakdown requiring hospitalization.
Wow.
And his second wife, according to the report, Basically adopted a stance of total submission just to survive his incredibly demanding patterns.
So he arrives in treatment carrying this
Mm-hmm.
just immense destructive energy.
Yeah.
And I assumed his behavior in the analysis itself reflected that chaos.
Oh, absolutely. The sessions were just characterized by relentless complaints, really sharp criticisms, deep reproaches,
Yeah.
all aimed squarely at the analyst.
Testing boundaries constantly.
Constantly. And he openly expressed this profound fear that the analyst would eventually lose control and have fits of rage, which of course mirrored his own volatile father. But then, almost in the same breath, he'd make these demands for signs of sexual affection, which seemed to mirror the seductive but ultimately confusing and damaging behavior he'd experienced from his mother.
So he's just running the full chaotic spectrum of his destructive history right there in the room with the analyst.
Exactly. Playing it all out.
And his core belief, you mentioned, was that his professional failure, he was a writer, wasn't he?
Yes. Struggling writer.
His inability to succeed as a writer was somehow fundamentally linked to the absence of genuine love from anyone in his life, including, now, the analyst.
Correct.
So he was essentially demanding that the analyst just transcend all the intense, maybe unbearable negative feelings he was inducing and just love him unconditionally right now.
Yes. That's precisely the dynamic. He demanded that Anaclitic feeling the missing love before he'd done the necessary work to tolerate or process his own aggression or the analyst's reactions to it.
A huge demand.
Huge. But the source material gives us this really quite stunning look at how the analyst managed this over a long period. We can actually trace the documented stages, starting with that initial difficult phase,
Yeah.
the negative narcissistic phase.
Okay. This is where the patient is projecting all their misery and the analyst internally just wants to flee.
That's it, exactly. Mr. A's negative narcissistic transference was stark. He would say things like, I am miserable, and quite chillingly, I feel like dying. And the analyst's corresponding internal experience, the negative narcissistic countertransference, was this visceral, powerful urge to escape. The analyst documented repeatedly experiencing feelings like, I am restless, I feel angry and disturbed, and that deeply human, understandable thought, I would like leaving.
Just wanting out of the room.
Wanting out. That visceral desire to escape is the countertransference resistance Spotnitz says must be resolved internally by the analyst before any genuine progress can happen.
Right. That's the resistance blocking that whole aggressive interchange you talked about.
Precisely. But the documentation shows that after that period was successfully navigated, meaning the analyst managed to absorb the rage without retaliating and, crucially, without actually running away or shutting down emotionally, the relationship began to shift.
Okay.
The patient, Mr. A, then entered the positive narcissistic phase.
And how did that positive shift manifest? How did it feel for Mr. A?
Well, Mr. A began to express positive narcissistic transference by saying things like, I feel loved rarely. Still tentative, notice,
Yeah.
rarely. But also, importantly, I feel comfortable at times. So the stability the analyst provided just by enduring was starting to have an effect.
And for the analyst, how did their internal experience change?
The analyst's corresponding positive narcissistic countertransference clearly eased the burden quite dramatically. Their internal feelings shifted to things like, I feel adequate, comfortable, and significantly, I feel I am at ease.
Okay, so that sounds like progress, a solid working relationship maybe. But Spotnitz describes this final stage, these transcendental feelings, which signal the real breakthrough the moment the analyst genuinely generates that missing anaclitic love.
Yes, the transcendental phase.
What was the actual content of that crucial, newly developed feeling in the analyst?
It's quite moving, actually. After years of this intense mutual work, the analyst reported experiencing the emergence of this needed, positive, anaclitic effect, a feeling that genuinely didn't exist at the start of the treatment, something that had to be generated through sheer therapeutic work and fortitude.
So what did it feel like internally?
The internal thoughts documented were, I would like to help him. He has worked hard. He is a worthwhile person. I really do like him. I would like to convey to him my positive feelings.
Wow.
And the key there is that it wasn't pity or just professional duty kicking in. It was described as the genuine feeling of care and validation, the feeling of being seen as worthwhile, and genuinely liked that Mr. A so desperately required for his own mature development, but had never received.
That's quite something.
It really is. And the crucial conclusion here, from Spotnitz's perspective, is that the schizophrenic patient fundamentally requires the therapist to sense, process, and ultimately return the full range of feelings necessary for mature adulthood, especially that feeling of being loved, the positive anaclitic effect.
Mm-hmm.
The therapist needs the patient's cooperation, yes, of course, but primarily they need the emotional capacity themselves to somehow transcend the often devastating impact of the intense negative feelings the patient brings into the room.
So wrapping this up,
Mhm.
what does this all mean for the patient who achieves remission? What's the end goal look like?
Well, the end goal is essentially achieving a mature relationship, one where the patient now has the capacity to feel a full range of their own feelings, the good, the bad, the aggressive, the loving, and can tolerate the full range of the therapist's feelings in response.
So the relationship moves beyond all that testing and demanding.
Exactly. It becomes characterized by mutual comfort, by genuine understanding, achieved through fearless, honest verbal communication, because they've successfully integrated both the aggressive and the constructive emotional interchanges.
It sounds like true emotional adulthood, in a way.
That's a good way to put it.
Which, thinking about it, raises a really important question, doesn't it? If this level of emotional integration, the ability to tolerate all feelings, the destructive and the constructive in both self and other, is what's required for a mature relationship in this very intense clinical setting, what does it truly take for any one of us, in any meaningful relationship in our ordinary lives, to engage in that same level of fearless, honest, and truly complete emotional communication?
That is the question, isn't it?
Something to definitely think about. We'll leave it there for this deep dive.